The click of a deadbolt usually signifies safety. It's the sound of the world being locked out, a signal that you are finally in your own private sanctuary. But that Saturday afternoon, when the heavy oak door of my sister's suburban Chicago home clicked shut, the sound didn't bring peace. It felt like the trigger of a trap snapping into place. I stood in the foyer, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums. Outside, I could hear the muffled hum of a black SUV idling at the curb. My sister, Vanessa, and her husband, Mark, were inside that car, heading toward a private airport for a 10-day Mediterranean escape they claimed they desperately needed. I was the reliable one, the younger sister who lived for spreadsheets and data analysis in Madison, the one who didn't have a husband or a social life to complicate things. I was the perfect candidate to watch their 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. I turned toward the living room, a rehearsed smile ready for my niece. Chloe was a beautiful child with cornflower, blue eyes, and a curtain of blonde hair, but there was a wall between her and the rest of the world. According to Vanessa, Chloe had suffered a neurological reset when she was 3, a rare, non-verbal condition that the doctors supposedly couldn't explain. She communicated through a tablet, using icons and a robotic text, took speech voice to ask for juice or tell us she was tired. But as I looked at her, Chloe wasn't reaching for her iPad. She wasn't tapping icons. She was standing by the window, watching her parents' car pull away with a gaze that was entirely too old for a second grader. She waited until the taillights vanished around the corner, and then she did something that stopped my heart. She turned to me, her lips trembling, and she spoke, not through a gesture. Her voice was small, raspy from years of disuse, but perfectly clear. "Auntie Elena," she whispered, "please, do not touch the tea in the blue bottle. My mother, she put something in it to make you go to sleep for a long, long time." The world tilted. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been kicked in the chest. I stared at this little girl, this child I had spent 4 years believing was incapable of speech, and realized that the reality I lived in was a house of cards, and a gale force wind had just started to blow. "My name is Elena Vance. I'm 34, and I make a living calculating risk. I look at numbers, patterns, and probabilities. I'm the person insurance companies call when they want to know the likelihood of a disaster. I'm trained to see the flaws in a system, the tiny cracks that eventually lead to a collapse. But for years, I was blind to the cracks in my own family, to understand how I ended up on that floor, gasping for air while my mute niece warned me of a poisoning. You have to understand my sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was 6 years older and a lifetime more polished. She was the star of every room, the woman who had a Pinterest-perfect life before Pinterest even existed. She married Mark, a high-level corporate lawyer, and they moved into a home that looked like a museum of neutral tones and expensive glass. Our parents had been wealthy, but they were frugal, old-school Midwesterners. When they passed away in a multi-car pileup 3 years ago, they left behind an estate worth nearly $4 million. Most of it was tied up in a complicated trust. The terms were specific. The funds were to be split equally between Vanessa and me. But any major withdrawal, anything over $50,000, required both of our signatures and a verified life necessity reason. My father had been a banker. He knew that money had a way of turning people into strangers, and he wanted to protect us from our own greed. I never touched my half. I had a good job, a quiet life, and I figured that money was for my future children or my retirement. Vanessa, however, lived as if the $4 million was already sitting in her checking account. She had the designer bags, the luxury SUV, the private school tuition for Chloe. I assumed Mark was making a killing at the firm. I never questioned it because I didn't want to be the jealous sister. That morning, Vanessa had called me in a panic. "Elena, it's our 10th anniversary. Mark surprised me with this cruise, but the sitter canceled. Please, you're the only person Chloe trusts. I've left everything ready. I even made you that organic lavender tea you love. It's in the blue thermos in the fridge. You've been so stressed, honey." You need to rest. She had hugged me twice before she left. Vanessa wasn't a hugger. She usually preferred a light air, kiss, or a pat on the shoulder. But that morning, she held me tight, smelling of expensive perfume and something else, something metallic, like adrenaline. Now, I looked at the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see the blue thermos sitting on the marble island. It looked innocent. It looked like a gesture of love. "Chloe," I said, my voice shaking so hard I could barely form the words. "Sweetheart, you can talk." She stepped closer to me, her eyes darting to the front door as if she expected her mother to burst back in at any second. "I have to be very quiet, Auntie. Mommy told me when I was little that if I ever spoke, the bad men would come for you. She said my voice was like a beacon, and if I used it, they would find you and take you away. I didn't want them to take you." I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean against the wall. Vanessa had gaslit a 3-year-old child into 5 years of silence using me as the leverage. She had weaponized a daughter's love to create a disabled child, a child that made Vanessa look like a saintly, self-sacrificing mother to the rest of the world. "What did you hear, Chloe?" I asked, kneeling so I was at her level. "Why did you say the tea is bad?" Chloe swallowed hard. 2 nights ago, I was supposed to be asleep, but I went to get my stuffed rabbit from the laundry room. Mommy and Daddy were in the kitchen. Mommy was holding a little white pill. She said, "This will keep Elena out of the way for at least 3 days. By the time she wakes up in the hospital, the papers will be filed, the money moved, and we'll be halfway to the islands." Daddy looked scared, but Mommy told him to shut up. She said, "Do you want to go to prison for the embezzlement, or do you want to be rich?" The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place with a sickening speed. The luxury lifestyle, the urgent need for a cruise, the neurological condition that kept Chloe quiet. Mark had been stealing from his firm and they were underwater. They needed my half of the trust to cover their tracks or to flee the country. But they couldn't get it without my signature or my incapacitation. I took a deep breath, trying to channel the cold analytical part of my brain. I was an actuary, I dealt in data, and the data told me that my sister was a predator. "Chloe, I need you to listen to me," I said. "We have to play a game. For the next few days, you have to be the Chloe everyone thinks you are. Can you do that? Can you use your iPad and be quiet when we are around other people?" She nodded, a single tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. "I'm good at being quiet, Auntie. I know you are, baby. But soon, you're going to be able to scream from the rooftops if you want to." The first thing I did was call Sarah. Sarah was my best friend from college, a forensic toxicologist who worked for the state. She was the only person I knew who wouldn't think I was having a mental breakdown. "Elena, is everything okay? You sound like you're running from a ghost," Sarah said when she picked up. "I might be," I replied. I explained the situation in short, jagged sentences. I told her about the thermos, about Chloe's voice, about the embezzlement. "Don't touch a drop of that tea," Sarah warned. "And don't leave the house. If they have a bereavement specialist or a friend checking in on you, you need to look sick. I'm coming over. I'll bring a field kit. We need to know exactly what's in that thermos if we're going to go to the police." While I waited for Sarah, I went into Vanessa's home office. It was a room I was usually forbidden from entering. The door was locked, but I knew my sister. She kept a spare key inside a hollowed-out book on the hallway shelf, a classic Nancy Drew mystery, ironic given the circumstances. The office was as organized as a Swiss watch. I started with the desk drawers. Nothing but stationery and high-end pens. I moved to the filing cabinet. Most of it was standard tax returns, insurance policies. But then, tucked behind a folder labeled landscaping, I found a manila envelope. Inside were sheets of paper covered in my own handwriting, or so it seemed. It was my signature over and over again, Elena Vance, Elena R. Vance, E. Vance. Some were shaky, others were perfect. It was a practice sheet. Someone had been teaching themselves how to forge my name for months. Beneath the practice sheets was a document from a law firm in Indianapolis, not Chicago. It was a power of attorney form, giving Vanessa full control over my financial assets and my medical decisions in the event of my unforeseen incapacitation. My blood ran cold. The plan wasn't just to steal the money. The plan was to drugging me, make it look like a suicide attempt or a mental breakdown, and then use the power of attorney to move me into a long-term care facility where I would be safe and quiet. While they drained my bank accounts and disappeared, I heard a soft tap at the office door. I jumped, nearly dropping the papers. It was Chloe. She was holding her iPad. She tapped an icon, and the mechanical voice said, "Someone is at the door." I checked the security camera on my phone. It wasn't Sarah. It was a woman I didn't recognize, tall, wearing a sharp gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. A lawyer? A friend? "Chloe, go to your room," I whispered. "Use your iPad if she talks to you. Do not say a word." I walked to the front door, my heart hammering. I opened it just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound tired and slightly dazed. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Elena, I'm Meredith. I'm a friend of Vanessa's. She called me from the road. She was so worried about you. She said you looked terribly pale when she left. I just wanted to drop off some groceries and see if you needed anything." Vanessa was already setting the stage. She was sending witnesses to testify that I was sick before I'd even touched the tea. "That's very kind," I said, leaning against the doorframe as if I were struggling to stand. I think I'm just coming down with a flu." I was just about to drink the tea Vanessa made for me and head to bed. "Oh, you poor thing," Meredith said, her eyes scanning the foyer behind me. "Why don't I come in and help you get settled? Vanessa would never forgive me if I didn't look after you." "No," I said a bit too sharply. I'm not decent, and I don't want to get you sick. I'll be fine. Just sleep and tea." I closed the door before she could protest. I watched her on the camera. She didn't leave immediately. She stood on the porch for a full minute, typing something into her phone, before finally walking back to her car. 10 minutes later, Sarah arrived. She parked 2 blocks away and walked to the back gate, carrying a nondescript gym bag. I let her in through the kitchen. "Show me," she said, skipping the pleasantries. I handed her the blue thermos. Sarah put on gloves, opened the lid, and took a small sample with a pipette. She dropped it into a vial and added a chemical reagent. We waited in silence as the liquid shifted from clear to a deep, bruised purple. "Chloral hydrate," Sarah whispered. "And a massive dose of it. It's an old-school sedative. In this concentration, it wouldn't just make you sleepy, Elena. It would drop your blood pressure to dangerous levels. If you had a pre-existing condition, or if you were left alone for too long, it could be fatal. At the very least, you'd be unconscious for 48 hours. I sat down at the kitchen table, the reality of my sister's malice finally sinking in. She wasn't just a thief. She was willing to risk my life. "We have to go to the police," Sarah said, reaching for her phone. "No," I said, stopping her. "Not yet. If we go now, they'll get a call from their lawyer before they've even landed. They'll claim it was a mistake, that she accidentally mixed up her own medication with my tea. We need them to commit the fraud. We need them to believe the plan is working." "Elena, that's incredibly dangerous," Sarah said. "I'm an actuary, Sarah. I've calculated the risk. The only way to ensure they never come near me or Chloe again is to catch them in the act of the theft." The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception. I sent a text to Vanessa on Sunday morning. "Tea was wonderful. Feeling so sleepy. Think I'm going to sleep all day. Love you." Vanessa's reply came an hour later. "So glad, honey. Rest is the best medicine. Don't worry about a thing. We're out at sea, might lose signal soon. Kiss Chloe for us." She was at sea, yet the GPS on the Find My Friends app, which Vanessa had forgotten she shared with me years ago, placed her at a boutique hotel in Indianapolis. She wasn't on a cruise. She was less than 3 hours away, waiting for the drug to take effect so she could visit the law firm and finalize the power of attorney. I spent the time gathering evidence. I recorded Chloe's testimony. I photographed the forgery practice sheets. I documented the embezzlement trail from Mark's firm using a backdoor password I'd found in his office. But the hardest part was watching Chloe. Without her parents there, she became a different person. She talked incessantly, as if she were trying to make up for 5 years of silence in 5 days. She told me about the silent games her mother would play, the way Vanessa would reward her with extra dessert for being the best quiet girl. On Monday night, I received a call from Marcus. Marcus was a friend from my college days, an assistant prosecutor who I knew I could trust. I laid out the situation. "Alana, you're playing with fire," he said, "but the evidence you have, it's solid. If they show up at that firm in Indy tomorrow and present a forged document while you are incapacitated, that's a felony. Actually, it's about 6 felonies. Will you be there?" I asked. "I've already contacted the Indianapolis PD and the FBI. Embezzlement from a firm that handles federal contracts makes this their jurisdiction. We'll be there. But you have to stay sick. If Vanessa calls you and you sound fine, the whole thing falls apart." Tuesday morning, the day of the meeting. I sent one last text to Vanessa at 9:00 a.m. Can't get out of bed. Dizzy. Everything is dark. Please help. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew what she would do. She wouldn't call 911. She would call Meredith or another accomplice to check on me in a few hours, long after she'd signed the papers. I sat in the living room with Sarah and Chloe, watching the live feed from a hidden camera the police had installed in the Indianapolis law office. We saw Vanessa and Mark walk in. They looked perfect, grieving, concerned, and utterly professional. Vanessa was wearing a black dress, her eyes artistically rimmed with a bit of red makeup to look like she'd been crying. They sat down with the attorney, a man named Warren Ducker. "Mr. Ducker, thank you for seeing us on such short notice," Vanessa said, her voice trembling perfectly. "As we discussed on the phone, my sister Elena has had a significant mental collapse. She's currently at our home, under the care of a friend, but the doctors say she needs long-term psychiatric help. She signed these power of attorney forms last week, before the episode became severe. We just need to finalize the transfer of the trust to ensure her care is paid for." She slid the forged papers across the desk. "I see," Ducker said, leaning back. "And you're sure this is what she wanted?" "She was terrified, Mr. Ducker," Mark chimed in. "She knew she was losing her grip. She wanted Vanessa to handle everything. She trusts her sister more than anyone." Ducker picked up the papers. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at the door. "That's interesting," Ducker said, "because I just spoke to Elena Vance 10 minutes ago, and she seemed remarkably stable." The blood drained from Vanessa's face. She started to stand up. "I don't know what you mean. She's—" The door to the conference room burst open. 4 plainclothes officers and Marcus walked in. "Vanessa Whitford, Mark Whitford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and interstate wire fraud," the lead officer said. "And we'd also like to talk to you about a certain blue thermos." Vanessa didn't go quietly. She screamed. She cursed. She tried to claim I was the one who was crazy, that I had set her up. But when they played the recording of Chloe's voice, the recording where her own daughter explained how she'd been threatened into silence, Vanessa finally stopped talking. She slumped into the chair, the Pinterest-perfect mask shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Mark, hoping for a lighter sentence, turned state's evidence and confessed to everything: the embezzlement, the plan to drug me, and the years of psychological abuse they'd inflicted on Chloe to keep her as a prop for their public image. Vanessa was sentenced to 15 years. Mark got 8. The bereavement specialist, Meredith, was revealed to be a disgraced former nurse who had provided the chloral hydrate. She was sentenced as an accessory. But the real story wasn't the trial. It was the girl. I was granted full custody of Chloe, Moving her out of that museum-like house and into my cozy, cluttered apartment in Madison was the best day of my life. The first night we were there, we had breakfast for dinner, pancakes with extra syrup and chocolate chips. Chloe sat at the table talking about a book we'd started reading. She stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. "Auntie Elena?" "Yes, baby." "Is it okay if I'm loud?" I walked over and hugged her, a real hug, the kind that lasts. "Chloe, you can be as loud as a thunderstorm. You can sing, you can shout, you can talk until the sun comes up. I am always, always listening." She smiled, and for the first time, the light in her eyes was brighter than the shadows. 6 months later, we were sitting on the porch of a small cottage we'd bought near a lake. The trust money was finally being used for what it was meant for, a real life. Chloe was in a school where she was known as the smartest, most talkative kid in the 3rd grade. She'd joined the choir, she'd made friends. Every now and then, I think about that Saturday afternoon. I think about the sound of the deadbolt. I realize that it wasn't the sound of a trap. It was the sound of the old world ending so a new one could begin. My sister thought she was the one in control. She thought she could calculate the risks and come out on top, but she forgot the most important variable in any equation, the human spirit. She forgot that even the quietest voice, when given a chance, can bring down a kingdom of lies. "Auntie! Look!" Chloe shouted, pointing toward the lake. A family of ducks was paddling past, the ducklings struggling to keep up with their mother. "They're so fast!" "Can we get some bread? Can we?" "Go grab the bag from the counter," I called back. I watched her run down the lawn, her laughter echoing across the water. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, better than any balanced spreadsheet, better than any perfectly calculated risk. It was the sound of freedom, and as I sat there, sipping a cup of regular, plain tea, brewed by my own hand, I knew that we were finally, truly safe. The journey to healing wasn't a straight line, of course. Chloe had night terrors for the first year. Sometimes she'd wake up and touch my face, whispering my name just to make sure I was still there, still breathing, still real. We went to therapy together. We learned that trust is like a bone. When it breaks and heals, it's often stronger in the place where the fracture occurred. I also learned a lot about my own mother. During the discovery phase of the trial, I found a letter she'd written to her lawyer shortly before she died. "I am worried about Vanessa," she wrote. "There is a darkness in her that she hides with beauty. I fear for Elena. I fear for Chloe. I have designed this trust to be a barrier, but I hope my girls find the strength to be each other's keepers. If they cannot, I hope the truth finds its own way out." My mother hadn't been able to stop Vanessa, but she'd given me the tools to do it myself. She'd left me the family home, the trust, and the memories of a woman who valued integrity over appearance. I never visited Vanessa in prison. I didn't need to. I didn't want her perfume or her air, kisses in my life ever again. I sent her one letter, a single sentence. "Chloe found her voice, and she has a lot to say." I heard through Marcus that Vanessa threw the letter across the room and refused to speak to her counselor for a week. Some people never change. They just find new ways to be silent. But in our house, there is no more silence. There are dinosaur debates and science fair projects. There are loud movies and even louder arguments about whose turn it is to do the dishes. There is life, messy and beautiful and loud. And every now and then, when the sun is setting and the world feels particularly still, I look at the blue thermos. I kept it, not as a souvenir of the poison, but as a reminder of the warning. It sits on a high shelf in the garage, covered in dust. It reminds me that I am an actuary. I calculate risk, and the greatest risk of all is staying quiet when you should be speaking up. I'm telling you this story because maybe you're standing in a foyer right now. Maybe you hear a click and feel like the walls are closing in. Maybe you're the reliable one, the one everyone thinks they can push around. If you are, I want you to look around, listen to the small voices. Pay attention to the things that feel off. Don't be afraid to break the neutral tones of your life to find the truth underneath. Because your voice is your greatest weapon, and once you find it, no one can ever make you quiet again. The transition from the world of numbers to the world of motherhood was more jarring than I expected. In my old life, everything had an answer. 2 plus 2 was always 4. The probability of a flood in a certain zip code could be determined with 99% accuracy. But a 7-year-old girl, there is no formula for that. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, about a year after the custody became permanent, I found Chloe sitting in the middle of her room, surrounded by old photographs. She had found a box I'd brought from our parents' attic. "Who is this, Auntie?" she asked, holding up a faded picture of a young girl with a fierce scowl and a basketball under her arm. I sat down beside her. "That's your mother. She was 10 years old. She was the best point guard in the city." Chloe looked at the picture for a long time. "She looks happy." "She was," I said. "She was talented and strong." "What happened? How do you explain the slow erosion of a soul to a child? How do you explain that somewhere between the basketball court and the marble foyer, Vanessa decided that appearing perfect was more important than being good?" "I think," I said carefully, "that she got lost. She started looking at the world like it was a mirror, and she only wanted to see a certain version of herself. When the mirror didn't show what she wanted, she tried to break it." Chloe touched the photo. "I don't want to be like that. I want to look at the world like it's a window." I pulled her close. "You already do, baby. You see everything." That night after Chloe went to sleep, I went to my office and pulled up the trust accounts. The money was all there now, recovered and secured. I thought about what to do with it. Vanessa's half had been forfeited as part of her criminal restitution, but I didn't want it. I called Marcus the next morning. "I want to set up a foundation," I told him. "The Patricia Vance Fund for Child Advocacy. I want it to focus on children with selective mutism and those in situations of psychological coercive control. I want to find the kids who are being silenced." "Alana, that's millions of dollars," Marcus said. "Exactly. It's money that was almost used to destroy a life. Let's use it to save some instead." The foundation took off faster than I expected. It turned out there were thousands of Chloes out there, children who were being used as pawns, children whose silence was a survival mechanism. We built a network of therapists, lawyers, and advocates. I used my skills as an actuary to track the data, to find the patterns of abuse that often go unnoticed by the system. I became a different kind of risk analyst. I wasn't protecting insurance companies anymore. I was protecting human potential. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at a conference in Chicago. It was in a hotel only a few blocks from the law office where Vanessa had been arrested. I stood on the stage, looking out at a sea of professionals. We often talk about the mute child as if the problem lies within the child, I told them. But silence is rarely a choice made in a vacuum. It is an adaptation to an environment where truth is a liability. If we want to hear these children, we have to stop looking at their mouths and start looking at their surroundings. We have to be willing to see the forgery in the perfect families. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then the applause started. But I wasn't looking at the crowd. I was looking at the back of the room, where a 10-year-old girl in a purple dress was standing, her hands raised high. After the speech, we walked through the city. It was a crisp autumn day, the wind whipping off the lake. "You did good, Auntie," Chloe said, swinging her bag. "Thanks, sweetie. Only if it has pineapple." "You're a monster," I joked, poking her in the ribs. "A loud monster?" she shouted, running ahead of me. As I watched her weave through the crowds, I felt a sense of completion. The numbers finally added up. The risks had been taken, the losses had been accounted for, and the result was a life that was worth more than any trust fund. I sometimes wonder what my father would think of the foundation. I think he'd be proud of the life, necessity, reason I found for the money. He knew that the greatest necessity of all isn't a house or a car or a cruise. It's the ability to speak your truth without fear, We are all born with a voice. Some of us lose it along the way, buried under the weight of other people's expectations or the darkness of their secrets. But it's never truly gone. It's just waiting for someone to listen. I stopped at a crosswalk and looked up at the towering buildings. The world felt big, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. I knew the cracks in the system, and I knew how to fix them.
Elena,
Come on, Chloe called from the other side of the street. I laughed and ran to join her. Life is loud, life is messy, and for the first time in my 34 years, I'm not just calculating the probability of a disaster. I'm living the miracle of the recovery. And that, my friends, is the only math that matters. Now, I want to tell you about the one thing I didn't expect. About a year after the trial ended, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just a postmark from a small town in Indiana. Inside was a small, leather-bound diary. It belonged to Jared, Chloe's father. If you're reading this, Elena, it's because I'm gone, the first page read. Not dead, just gone from the life I knew. I can't face you, and I can't face Chloe, but I need you to know the truth about the beginning. I sat at my kitchen table, my heart pounding as I read through his confession. It turned out that Vanessa hadn't just gotten lost. She had been planning this since before Chloe was even born. She had married Jared specifically because he was manageable, a man with a secret gambling debt she discovered and used to tie him to her. She had wanted a life of absolute power, and when the inheritance wasn't enough to satisfy her, she had manufactured a crisis to justify taking mine. The night Chloe stopped talking, Jared wrote, was the night I finally broke. I saw what Vanessa did to her, the way she hissed those threats into that poor baby's ear. I wanted to scream, I wanted to take her and run. But I was a coward. I let the mirror stay unbroken because I was afraid of the shards. He ended the diary with a plea for forgiveness, not from me but from Chloe. I didn't show the diary to Chloe, not then. She was too young, and she was doing so well. I put it in a safe deposit box, a truth for her to find when she was old enough to handle the weight of it. But it changed how I saw the world one last time. It reminded me that the villains in our lives aren't always monsters born of shadows. Sometimes they are people who are just too afraid to be real. People who think that control is a substitute for love. I'm not afraid of the shards anymore. A few months later, I met a man. His name is David, and he's a high school history teacher. He doesn't care about designer bags or Pinterest perfect homes. He likes to hike, he loves old jazz, and the first time he met Chloe, he didn't try to fix her or pity her. He just asked her which dinosaur was the most misunderstood. The Spinosaurus, Chloe said without hesitation. Everyone think it's just a bigger T-Rex, but it was actually semi-aquatic. It was its own thing. David nodded. I like that. Being your own thing is important. I watched them talk, and I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with herbal tea or lavender oil. It was the warmth of a life being built on honesty. Last weekend, the four of us, David, Chloe, Sarah, and I, went back to the lake cottage. We spent the day on the water, and in the evening, we built a bonfire on the shore. The sparks flew up into the dark sky, disappearing among the stars. Auntie, Chloe asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. Yeah? I'm glad the tea was bad. I looked at her. Surprise, honey. Because if it had been good, you would have stayed the quiet Elena, and I would have stayed the quiet Chloe. We would still be living in that mirror house. I kissed the top of her head. You're right, baby. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are just the world's way of making sure we finally wake up. We sat in silence for a while, but it was a good silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need words because everything has already been said. The blue thermos is still in the garage, but the tea is long gone, and in its place, we have a life that is perfectly wonderfully, loudly balanced. As I look back on everything, I realize that the most important lesson I learned wasn't about fraud or forgery or the legal system. It was about the power of witnessing. In my old life, I was a witness to data. I watched numbers move across a screen, and I predicted where they would go. But I wasn't a witness to people. I didn't see the bruises on my niece's spirit. I didn't see the desperation in my brother-in-law's eyes. I didn't see the hollow core of my sister's perfection. Now I try to see everything. I see the way a child hesitates before they speak. I see the way a mother clutches her purse when she's lying. I see the way a friend shows up with a field kit when the world is falling apart. I am a witness now. And that is a far more powerful thing to be than an actuary. The Patricia Vance Fund has helped over 500 children in the last 2 years. Every time a child finds their voice, I feel a little bit of the weight leave my own shoulders. Every time a perfect facade is stripped away to reveal the truth underneath, the world gets a little bit brighter. Vanessa is still in prison. She writes to me sometimes bitter, angry letters that I never answer. She still thinks she's the victim. She still thinks the world owes her a mirror that only shows beauty. But Chloe is free. She's 13 now. She's tall, with the same scowl her mother had in that old basketball photo, but her eyes are full of a kindness that Vanessa never knew. She wants to be a writer. She wants to tell stories about the things that happen in the shadows. People need to know, Auntie, she told me recently. They need to know that just because it looks quiet doesn't mean it's safe. I know, I said. Tell them, Chloe. Tell them everything, and she is. So if you're listening to this, and you're feeling the weight of a secret, or you're living in a world of neutral tones and hidden bruises, listen to me. Don't drink the tea. Break the mirror. Find your voice, because the world is waiting to hear what you have to say. And I promise you, once you start talking, the truth will set you free in ways you can't even imagine. My name is Alina Vance. I used to calculate risk. Now I celebrate the rewards. And the greatest reward of all is sitting right across from me at the kitchen table, arguing about whether or not we should get a dog.
A big one, Auntie. One that barks at the mailman.
We'll see, Chloe. We'll see. I'm smiling as I write this. The spreadsheets are gone. The data is clear. The probability of happiness, 100%. Thank you for listening to our story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's the only one that matters. Take care of yourselves, and take care of the voices around you. You never know whose life you might be saving just by listening. Good night, and stay loud. One final thought before I go. I recently went back to that house in the Chicago suburbs. Not to go inside. It had been sold to a young couple with 3 noisy toddlers, but just to stand at the curb. I looked at the oak door. I looked at the window where Chloe had stood, watching her parents drive away. A woman was out on the front lawn, chasing a toddler with a bubble wand. She saw me and waved. She looked tired, her hair was a mess, and there were grass stains on her jeans. She looked nothing like Vanessa. She looked happy. "Everything okay?" she called out. "Everything is perfect," I said. I turned and walked away, the sound of the bubbles popping in the air behind me. The house wasn't a prison anymore. It was just a house. The ghosts were gone, and as I drove back toward Madison, toward my real life, I realized that I had finally balanced the most important account of all. I had settled the debt I owed to my younger self, and I had invested in a future that was truly, finally, our own. The click of a deadbolt usually signifies safety, but now I know that real safety doesn't come from a lock. It comes from the truth, and the truth is we are finally home. The end. Stay safe, stay honest, and always trust your gut. It knows the way home, even when the lights are out. Signing off, Alina Vance, Loud Monsters Forever. Bye for now.